Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, hospitals under attack in Syria. Why are medical facilities still being targeted by Syrian government and Russian forces? Also in the show, a social media warning from Bahrain, where what you follow online could land you into legal trouble. And finally, in Australia, why did federal police raid the country's public broadcasting offices? We are live on Al Jazeera, and as always, you can join the conversation on Twitter or on our YouTube live stream.
This doctor says even this children's hospital couldn't escape the regime's shelling, despite coordinates being shared with the UN.
During the airstrikes, my wife and daughters were also at the hospital, but I had to keep them here to be able to evacuate the others. The hospital was full. It was tough to decide and keep the crew safe at the same time. We have only two options, either stay or die.
Following the Syrian regime's latest airstrikes targeting the health facilities in Idlib, medical workers think they are being deliberately targeted. Aid organizations are scared to send crews into Syria, leading to a shortage in medical supplies. People say here it is much easier to find weapons than finding medicine.
That report was from Al Jazeera's Sinem Kusulu, and it features one of more than 25 health facilities that have been bombed in northwest Syria since the Syrian government and Russian forces began their offensive in rebel-controlled Idlib. Why are the attacks allowed to continue, and what impact is it having on Syrian communities? Well, with us to discuss this is Zahir Sahlul, co-founder and president of the NGO Med Global. Dr. Zahir Sahlul, welcome to the stream. Welcome back to the stream. You were just in Idlib. How are hospitals and medical staff coping?
They're praying for the best. I visited Idlib last week. I'm back in Chicago, where things are nice and safe and stable for our patients here in the hospital. We have the best access to healthcare. And we spend, of course, tons of money to save one life. In Syria, doctors and nurses have to struggle to save the lives of their patients and save their hospitals. I visited 7 hospitals in the province of Idlib. All of them have been worried about their future and whether the hospital will be still standing in the next week or not. In light of the 25 hospitals that were bombed in southern Idlib and northern Hama. But by the way, when a hospital is bombed, it means that you are depriving the local population from access to healthcare. That means if your kids are sick, you cannot take them to the hospital, you cannot vaccinate them. If a woman is pregnant, she cannot go and deliver babies. When someone has a chronic condition or a heart attack, they cannot go to the hospital. And that will lead to displacement of population. In the last 4 weeks, according to the United Nations, about 300,000 Syrians have been displaced from southern Idlib and northern Hama. One of the main reasons is the targeting and bombing of hospitals and schools and markets, of course, targeting civilian infrastructures.
And that targeting comes via headlines like this. So have a look here, this from The Independent. Doctors in Idlib will no longer share coordinates of hospitals with the United Nations after repeated attacks from Russian and Syrian forces. So online, of course, this has caused quite a stir. There are tweets circulating like this from Razan, who says this would be a good time to lobby all UN member states in upholding their responsibility to protect. It is necessary now more than ever. The UN, of course, is that body that so many people look to for safety and for help. So the idea now that doctors and medical staff are deliberately having to go out of their way not to tell the UN about their locations for their own safety seems strange, seems odd and scary. Talk to us about that.
It's actually absurd to talk about this process, which is called deconflicting, which is basically sharing your GPS coordinates as a hospital with the international community, with the UN, expecting that the UN will protect you and expecting also the permanent members of the UN Security Council not to target your hospitals. We're talking about specifically here Russia. But it is also part of our norms and ethics as a humanitarian, medical community, international community, not to target hospitals, ambulances, and doctors, even in the time of war. For 150 years, based on Geneva Conventions and protocols, doctors, hospitals, and ambulances should not be targeted, should not be hit, doctors should not be killed, and nurses, even in the time of war, even if they are treating the injured fighters. We're talking about hospitals that are treating communities here, treating kids, I visited these hospitals, the birth center in Ariha, which is treating children and women, and they are worried that they will be targeted and bombed like any other hospital that were bombed in the nearby villages. They are now doing most of their operations in the basement of the hospital, not in the upper floor, because they're more likelihood for the upper floor to be bombed. Some of the hospitals are even digging the hospital and building them inside a mountain, digging them inside the mountain in a cave to protect the hospitals and the patient. And in spite of that, they are being hit. So this deconflicting process is not helping. 9 of the 25 hospitals were hit, shared their GPS coordinates with the UN. There was no investigation about that. There's no accountability. And that's why we are keep hearing about this news of the hospitals being targeted. The purpose of the UN is not to report about the attacks, but to investigate them and assign accountability. And this is not happening, even though that you have 550 hospitals in Syria that were bombed, according to Physicians for Human Rights, from the beginning of the crisis.
Now, Russian and Syrian government forces have been criticized, of course, and I want to play a clip from the UN ambassador, the Russian UN ambassador, because they've been criticized for violating humanitarian law. So have a listen to Vasily Nebingia. He's Russia's UN ambassador, and this is his defense to the UN on May 17th.
Mr. President, we categorically reject accusations of violations of international humanitarian law. Neither the Syrian army nor the Air Force of Russia are conducting attacks against civilians or civilian infrastructure. Our target is the terrorists, and this is what some of you prefer not to mention.
So he says it's about quote-unquote terrorism. What's the response?
In Idlib province, there's 3 million people. 1 million of them are children. What I've seen in my eyes, in all of these hospitals that I visited, civilians who are being treated, children, newborn in incubators, women who are having C-sections and delivering, patients with chronic diseases. In the attack that happened in the same day that I visited the city of Ariha, there was an open market that I visited. It was bustling with life because people were shopping for in the month of Ramadan. Right after we left, it was hit with a missile. A mother and her 3 babies were killed in that market. These are not terrorists. These are civilians who are living in their cities and villages because that's where they live. They don't want to be refugees. And actually, there is no way for them to be refugees because Turkey has sealed the border in the north. So the only way that they can do is to stay living in their neighborhoods and cities. And these attacks are basically killing them, displacing them, mutilating them, and causing a lot of distress on the civilian population. I think the ambassador, the Russian ambassador, should be ashamed that not only that his government is supporting a government that is targeting civilians and hospitals and schools in a way that we have not seen in the recent conflicts. This is never happened in history, but also he's lying about that.
So I want to end with a comment we got from the president of the Syrian American Medical Society, of course, of which you used to be a part of. This is Ahmed Tarakshi, and here's what he told the stream.
Many of our doctors and nurses lost their lives in Syria. Many of our hospitals were targeted and destroyed over the last 8 years. We went to every community to serve it. We made sure that our patients are safe. Now, it is time for the law to protect us. We want to heal everybody in Syria. We want to heal Syria.
Our thanks for that comment. We'll have to pause the conversation on Syria for now, but thank you to Zahir for giving us that update. Our next topic is in Bahrain, which is warning its citizens to think twice before following social media accounts that share negative opinions about the government. The country's Ministry of Interior sent a text message late last week to Bahraini phones saying citizens could face legal action for following accounts which are biased or incite discord. So how are Bahraini activists responding? In Berlin, Saeed Youssef Al-Muhtah, a blogger and human rights activist from Bahrain, he is vice president of the group Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. And in Melbourne, Australia, Fatima Yazbek is a spokesperson for the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Welcome to the stream, both of you. Well, we also reached out to the government to share their views in this segment, and they have not yet responded. So, Saeed, what was your reaction to the announcement?
Well, I think this announcement by the government of Bahrain is a great of concern and show that the government is not interested in the rule of law. I mean, in another word, it's a definition of repression, I would say. I would say repression, it was first in the street. Many protesters were killed. Many protesters were executed. Like 3 victims of torture were executed. More than 4,000 political detainees were arrested for a political reason, and torture is ongoing. And now the government, other new step is that the repression reach to the social media, not only in the streets. So it is escalating and show that the government is targeting all people who are criticizing the government on social media. And not only that, but even following on social media is a crime in Bahrain now.
I want to share with our audience and you too as well a couple of tweets from the Ministry of Interior. So this from June 1st, anti-cybercrime, countering, inciting social media accounts that promote sedition is a national duty, and it's part of the community partnership to protect the security and the safety of the nation. Here's another one. Individuals providing support and backing to those accounts through comments will be held accountable. So, Fatima, what do we know about that word accountable? What do we know about the legal recourse and what the government is planning?
Of course, the government is planning to take legal actions. They will interrogate the people who follows those accounts. They will arrest some of those people. They will accuse them of inciting hatred into the community and disturbing the public order. The government of Bahrain does not accept any kind of criticism, does not accept any kind of demanding the people's basic rights and freedoms. They are campaigning, they are raiding all the kinds of freedoms in the country. The people are not allowed to speak about their demands, about their rights. They are not either allowed to speak about the human rights abuses and violations they are subjected to. As Sayed said, there are more than 4,000 political prisoners in the Bahraini jails. Those prisoners are subjected to every kind of torture you can imagine, and nobody is allowed to speak about them. Anybody who dare to speak about these violations and abuses is going to be arrested, is going to be accused of fake charges, and is going to be subjected to torture to confess that he did commit those charges and to sign on those fake confessions. So the government is trying to silence all the critics. The government is trying to silence all the people in the country. They are trying to control what do they think in their minds.
So when we talk about control, I want our audience just to be clear, because definitely for the people that are watching the stream now and will watch it later, social media is a part of their daily lives. So Mark Owen Jones, who's a writer and a professor, writes, this is verging on the absurd. Bahrain is now saying that simply following accounts that spread discord, which isn't defined, is illegal, clearly made by people who really don't understand social media. And Saeed, that's because following an account doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with what that account has to say. Do you think this is a surprise, taking it to this step? Saeed?
Yes, if you can. I didn't hear it very clear.
That's okay. The idea of following someone on social media for some online seems like it's a bit of a far reach. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's decent. It's silenced by the government of Bahrain. I mean, Bahrain is using the legal provision to silence decent. Like, I just give you one example. Like my colleague and friend Nabil Rajab, who is sentenced to 5 years in jail for a tweet. It's also a clear example of how the government is targeting those who are criticizing them in the internet. And another example is Ibrahim Sharif, who was also recently arrested for tweets he posted on social media. So, I mean, it's clear that there is a repression on those people who are criticizing the government in the internet. Also, I want to add that Reporter Without Border ranked Bahrain 167 out of 80 country in terms of free press, and so that shows you the level of preparation that we are facing in Bahrain.
You mentioned Nabil Rajab. He's been on this show several times. We got a comment from someone who also mentions him and other people who might be affected by this. This is Joy. She's the head of advocacy at the Index on Censorship, and she sent us this video comment.
Index on Censorship is extremely concerned about the latest crackdown in Bahrain. We're not surprised because it's part of a pattern of the regime suppressing freedom of expression and persecuting human rights defenders, such as Nabil Rajab, for example, who is in prison and who should be freed. We think it's extremely important that the international community shows its disapproval and that countries in their bilateral relations show Bahrain that this is not acceptable.
Fatima, how will this impact people's daily lives, especially those who are involved with criticism or critiquing the government?
The government is making is promoting fear among the citizens. So the Bahraini citizens are now fear if they want to just follow an account or if they want to just tweet about something, like a post on Facebook or anything else. They feel that they are not free to do so. They are not free to do whatever they want on social media. Any word or any simply to like something on Facebook or on Twitter will lead them maybe to prison. And not to forget to mention that the government had closed the only independent newspaper in the country, al-assad newspaper, late in the previous year. So there is no press freedom in the country, no freedom of expression, and the people are being restricted from everything they want to do or they want to speak about.
Mariam on Twitter says this is an absolute infringement on our rights to freedom of association and expression. It also sets a dangerous precedent as it's basically a green light to police even the simplest forms of civic engagement. That is all the time we have for now on this subject. But thank you, Saeed and Fatima and our community for joining us. And on to our final segment. Federal police in Australia have raided the headquarters of the national broadcaster, ABC. Police were searching for information related to a series of reports from 2017 called the Afghan Files. In it, ABC journalists cited leaked classified documents accusing Australian special forces of unlawful killings in Afghanistan. Here's the ABC's editorial director, Craig McCurtry.
To have a warrant executed on the headquarters of the national public broadcaster in this way, I can't state it enough, is an unwelcome development. It is really serious and we take it very, very seriously. It feels uncomfortable because, and this is a personal comment, it's not the Australia I know, for example. I've been a reporter in this country for a long, long time, and it's not what we expect. That's why it feels so unusual and uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable, and we should stand up and call it out.
Here with us is Peter Charlie, executive producer of Al Jazeera's investigative unit. Before Al Jazeera, he was a journalist and documentary producer in Australia and a contributor to the ABC. So, Peter, welcome to the stream. This ABC story went out 2 years ago. So why is it that we're seeing this happen today?
Well, it's a very good question, and one I think that all Australian journalists are asking. A new Conservative government was voted in just last month. And it's curious the timing of this raid and a raid the day earlier on a News Limited reporter who'd also reported on national security issues. It does raise the question, why now? And why are they coming down so hard on journalists, really for the first time in my memory?
Of course, the other raid is definitely circulating on Twitter. You see this tweet from Tim who says, yesterday it was Annika, today it's the ABC, AFP's second raid on journalists in as many days. So what effect, of course, is this going to have? It's new. So then also what effect will it have on journalism in Australia?
Well, the great danger with this, of course, is it's going to have a chilling effect on whistleblowers. Clearly, the ABC raid was aimed not necessarily at the reporters involved, though they were named in the search warrant. It's aimed at trying to identify and gather evidence on the whistleblower himself. And the most likely and logical outcome is that whistleblowers will be afraid to step up now. They'll be afraid to come forward with information they believe is of important public interest. And this, of course, this ABC story is a very important public interest story.
So here's the ABC's editorial director, Craig McMurtry, again commenting on the Afghan Files. Have a look.
This was outstanding reporting. It's 2 years ago. It was challenging content. It was looking at the conduct of special forces in Afghanistan. It wasn't an easy subject matter to report on, but I invite anybody who wants to have another look at that content to take a look at it, because it was clearly in the public interest, and sometimes difficult truths have to be told.
Difficult truths. You hear him there, of course, defending the reporting and defending that report. What was your reaction then, as a journalist who's worked there, who's worked in Australia and now is abroad? What was your reaction when you first heard this?
I was horrified. I think it's an absolute outrage that this occurred. When I woke up to this news this morning, I was mortified to hear that my colleagues at the ABC had been raided after revealing this very important story. And as you pointed out, it's 2 years since the story went to air. So why now are the Australian Federal Police coming in with such a raid? I mean, there are many questions that need to be asked here.
So there's two opposing ideas on Twitter among our community. The first is Lachlan, who says the raid set a dangerous precedent for police authority. The power granted by the warrant is in direct contrast to a free press. A free press is a core element to any democracy, and I worry that today's events have put us on a slippery slope to autocracy and media censorship. But on the other side of that spectrum is Lasty, who tweets, some journalists have made this out to be the end of free speech over this investigation and indicating their careers are finished. I don't believe so, and I respect quality journalism without breaching rules. So it's that breaching rules part, because he's not alone there with that sentiment online. What do you make of that? What does this indicate to you?
Well, look, I disagree entirely with that second tweet, and I agree with Lachlan, who expressed the first sentiment. Rules have been broken. I don't know exactly what's meant by that. Reporters here have revealed to the public what I think is an extremely important public interest story about an investigation ongoing in the Department of Defence about allegations of the Special Forces killing unarmed civilians and a child. And I think the Australian public has a right to know that. And the fact that the police are trying to stifle, it would seem, that sort of whistleblowing is very, very troubling to me. And I think I'd take it a step further than Craig McMurtry's comments. I think it's an egregious overreach on the part of the government and the police.
You mentioned the change in office. So the Prime Minister and the Home Affairs Minister both say that they have nothing to do with this. Timing, of course, online, people are saying the timing is curious. What do you make of the timing, just from your analytical view of this from afar?
Well, it raises a number of questions, and it just seems very, very peculiar that just a couple of weeks after the election of a Conservative government, these raids take place, years after the stories went to air. So, you know, I think a number of questions need to be answered, and further investigation is required. Yes, the Prime Minister and the Home Affairs Minister have distanced themselves from the raid, but the raids had to have been referred to the Federal Police by someone. And I think that's the important question we need to answer.
Another tweet here from Lachlan, who says, setting a precedent which allows for the government to barge in with a warrant and shut down journalists each time they're being held responsible for atrocious crimes is both reckless and dangerous. From journalists, from your fellow journalists back in Australia, what are you hearing from them now?
Oh, they're very worried. I mean, this has galvanised the journalistic community in Australia. And there's a real sense of concern and fear within the journalistic community that this may represent the first of possible further steps encroaching into journalistic independence and trying to, or imposing a chilling effect on investigative journalism and the sense of freedom that whistleblowers may have once felt, that they can come forward with information they feel the public needs to know.
Peter, Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. That's all the time we have for now. Thanks, of course, to our community for joining us. And thank you for watching at home. If you have a story idea that you want to see on the stream, tweet us at AJStream. Until next time, we'll see you online.